So I want to start this news item with a personal story of mine that I think is quite relevant to this, but I'm not going to go into too much details regarding it. So when I was younger, I was a bit of one of those boys, and I was in a relationship with this young woman, and I was kind of talking to other women on the side, doing stuff with women on the side. And she found out, and I convinced her to continue the relationship and promised her that I would change. And obviously, I had no real motivation to change in reality, but I promised her that I would. And then I continued to do what I was doing before. And one day, I, she invited me over to her place, and she kind of dropped these DMs in front of me on a printed piece of paper, and she said, "I thought you were going to change," and that that story reminds me of Manchester United's transfer strategy. I thought you were going to change, and the reality is that nothing has really changed with regards to Manchester United's transfer strategy, since they seem set to meet the criteria for the release clause of Antoine Griezmann at Atletico Madrid. Antoine Griezmann is 32 years old. Over the course of his career, particularly at his peak, he scored on average of sort of a goal every other game, which is a decent record. He's been obviously the majority of the peak of his career has been at Atletico Madrid. He had a spell at Barcelona, which was considered not to be particularly successful. And Manchester United the rumours are that Manchester United are going to break the release, are going to meet the conditions for that release clause, which is said to be quite a low amount, and triple Antoine Griezmann's wages, which is just, it's baffling to me that Manchester United continue to do this. And this is one of the real big issues of Manchester United with regard to their transfer strategy, their history of transfers since Sir Alex Ferguson left the club. And what they seem to do is they seem to buy sort of one or two players that are sort of permanent signings, things that they sort of players that they hope will develop into sort of mainstays at the club, will be big players for the club and be successful at the club over the course of a long career. Sort of almost like they're trying to recreate that class of '92 sort of feeling at Manchester United again. And you can see that sort of in the signing of De Gea. That was obviously Sir Alex Ferguson's signing. But then with Luke Shaw and Wan-Bissaka and Harry Maguire and some others like Bruno Fernandes and obviously Rashford, although he came through the youth system. Martial's another one. Greenwood is another one who came through the youth system. So they seem to be sort of occasionally, they will sign sort of two or three players who you think, okay, these are players who could be here for the next 10 or 15 years. And then what they do is they sign these players who they seem to intend to be sort of temporary fixers to clear shortages that they have in the squad. And I'm thinking of players like Alexis Sanchez, Ibrahimovic, Edson Cavani, and many others. Lindelof was one. Fred was another. Matic was another. And these are players where sort of they potentially were looking at sort of long-term, permanent signings for those positions, and for whatever reason couldn't get them, or there wasn't anybody suitable that was available at the time. And so they sort of brought this player in sort of we'll bring him in for a season or two and get what we can out of him, and then we'll look to sort of move him on. We'll loan him out or try to recoup some of the losses that we've made on this player through another transfer to a lesser club and move them on, and then we'll bring in sort of the permanent player that we're looking for in that position. And look at a player like Matic, for example. He probably only had 1 or 2 seasons left in him when he went to Manchester United, but he was a good sort of quick fix. And the issue that they have in with regard to those players, like a Sanchez, like a Jadon Sancho now, for example, is they want to get sort of 2 or 3 seasons, maybe 3 seasons out of that player, and then they look to move them on, but they've signed them to a 4 or 5 year contract, oftentimes paying them 300, 350, 400. In the case of Alexis Sanchez, £450,000 a week, and then they can't find a club for that player who would take on the wages that this player has been paid in a contract that the club thinks will get 2 or 3 years out of him. We'll give him a 4 year, and we'll get 2, maybe 3 years out of him, and then we'll look to move him on. And then obviously there's no club that's willing to take on the wages of a player that's being paid 300, 350, a lesser club like an Everton or a Tottenham that potentially you'd want to move these temporary signings onto. And these clubs won't take on those wages. And these players, they're offered, do you want to go to Everton? And they go, well, why do I want to go to Everton for? They're only offering me 100 grand a week. I'm not going to go to Everton for 100 grand a week. So Manchester United, they get stuck with these temporary signings. And then, of course, because they've signed them for such high wages, they can't justify not playing the player anymore. If you've got, for example, if you were to sign Griezmann, who's obviously the sort of the aim of that appointment would be that it will take the pressure off Rasmus Højlund, who in the future he's going to be the main striker, he's going to be the main guy for us, and we just need sort of a year or two to help him develop that talent, and then we'll sort of push Griezmann out the door and we'll get rid of him. But for the meantime, that's what we want Griezmann for. And so they bring in these players, they make those appointments to fill in these gaps temporarily, with the aim of we're going to bring somebody in later, or perhaps in this situation we've already got that guy, we just need him to develop for a year or two and then he'll be that guy. But they're going to sign Griezmann probably for 350 grand, and what will happen is that they'll probably put him on a 3 or 4 year deal, and what will happen is that they'll say, well, we can't not play him, we're paying 350 grand for the guy. We can't justify playing Rasmus Højlund, even though Rasmus Højlund is probably going to be at the club for the next 10, maybe 15 years. But because Rasmus Højlund is, I don't know what he's on, let's say 100 grand, and we've got Griezmann who's on 350 grand, we can't justify not playing Griezmann because we're paying him so much. So we've got to play him. And then what happens is that a player like Højlund, he doesn't develop into the player that you want him to develop into, like with a Martial and potentially a Cavani, or a Greenwood and Cavani or Ronaldo or Ibrahimovic. They don't develop into these players that Manchester United hope that they'll develop into, and so they make a loss on 2 fronts. They pay a transfer fee for a player that they're not going to want in a year or two. They pay stupid wages for a player that they're not going to want in a year or two. And then they financially put themselves in a corner where they make a loss not playing that player on the big wages, but then the player that they want to develop to replace that player on the big wages, he never develops into the player that they want him to. And so they end up getting rid of Greenwood and Martial, and Rashford doesn't become the potentially the central striker that they may have wanted him to. maybe the winger that they wanted him to. These players don't develop because, well, we had Alexis Sanchez on that wing for a bit and we were paying him 450 grand. So we couldn't not play him. And now Rashford's not the player that he should be. And now Rasmus Højlund's not the player he should be. And neither is Martial, because we make these temporary stops and pay stupid money to these players for 1 or 2 years. And then we just can't get rid of them. And then they sit on their contracts. They're offered a Tottenham, an Everton, a Valencia, somewhere to go and sort of settle down their careers. But because they don't want to take the lower wages, they sit on their contracts. And then the fans moan about this player's, he's got no passion, he's not got a place in the starting 11, he should just go, he's wasting a space, he's taking up of resources, etc., etc. But it's Manchester United again and again and again proving just how badly they want to be the new Banter club by signing these players who are supposed to be temporary signings that mess up the long-term vision that a club like Manchester United should have. And by the way, these players like a Griezmann, like a Cavani, like a Ibrahimovic, etc., etc., they shouldn't be on these wages, right? If you go back to, let's go back 20 years ago, 2003, 2005, we have instances where these players come into Manchester United in the short term, and I'm thinking of one player in particular. I can't think what his name is. Henrik Larsson, brought into Manchester United, temporary contract, wages not significant, not through the roof. And the reason that these players would want to come into Manchester United as they were winding down their careers was because of the allure of the club. Manchester United was the club to go to. You know, other than Real Madrid or Barcelona, there was nobody else but Manchester United that anybody would really want to go to. And so you could bring in these players and they wouldn't be on a significantly higher wage than anybody else in the club. And you could, because of that, justify not playing them. You could justify playing youth players ahead of them. You could justify playing youth players alongside of them, and having these players bring these young players along as what would likely be the aim for bringing in a Griezmann to bring along Rasmus Højlund. But unfortunately, Manchester United are making the same mistake again. And what will happen is that they won't be able to get rid of Griezmann. And Højlund won't become the player that they ultimately hope that he will be. If you like this channel, give us a like, a share and a subscribe, and have a great day.